Hi, I'm Chris Howard. I'm with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and I'm here in Brunswick, Maine at Crystal Spring Farm to talk with Seth about how he manages risk on his farm.
Yeah, my name's Seth Kroeck. I run Crystal Spring Farm here in Brunswick. I've been here for 22 years, and we manage just under 190 acres. Everything's certified organic. We lease the majority of that from a local land trust, and also, but maybe about a third of it from a local family. You know, during the time that we've been here, we spent maybe the first 2/3 of that time as a large CSA. The last 7 years, we've done a handful of crops for wholesale. So our big ones are organic carrots, organic Brussels sprouts, and organic wild blueberries. We were initially encouraged to look at crop insurance, I think, through a promotional push that happened with Cooperative Extension. So we've got a good relationship with our local office. They said, hey, we're getting word that specialty crop insurance for wild blueberries in particular is something that really could benefit you. You know, for most of our time, as I said, we were really highly diversified, and so we used that diversification as our self-insurance policy. If you have 50 crops and a few of them don't turn out well, you're generally going to make it up on other crops that do well. For us, when we made that transition to wholesale to just a few crops, each one of those is a significant percentage of what we're wanting for our gross in any given year. And so if you have a loss, and you know, we have those three major crops for us: carrots, Brussels sprouts, and blueberries. If you have a loss in one of those, it's a significant percentage of your gross income for the year. And so when we started looking at it and thinking about it, it really did make sense for us to try and insure what we could. At that time, the only thing that was insurable under specialty crop was wild blueberries, and so that was a logical pick for us. And so we reached out to the agent. We started having those conversations. You know, crop insurance is all set up federally and then run locally, and so the subsidization for the program comes from the USDA, the risk management agency through the USDA, subsidizes both the premium that the grower pays, but also subsidizes the claim numbers. And so that means that the amount of money it costs for us to get into coverage, you know, it's consistently been somewhere between $500 and $1,000, but it, you know, when you split that out over 35 acres, it's not a whole lot of money. It's provided us the ability to actually keep growing another year. I don't think anybody looks at crop insurance as a way to get complete coverage and be made whole again, but it does cover those costs, and it does cover some of the expected loss from income, which means that, you know, you can put the pieces back together and hope for a better year the following year. Me being an organic grower and being in the same place for the last 22 years, I've really seen a huge difference in the annual weather and climate risks that we're seeing. So, you know, over the course of many years, we're seeing shifts in, you know, the length of our fall season, the variability of our spring season. We've lost our blueberry crop a couple of times in the last 7 years to late freezes, where this crop insurance has been really helpful. But the extreme variabilities of hotter, drier lengths of weather, more intense rainfalls, later unpredictable freezes, all of those things are something that crop insurance can really help with, as far as allowing you to kind of stay in farming and keep growing for another year. It's going to have to be one of many things that we're using as growers to kind of look at the changes in climate and how we're going to be able to stay in business. But I think it has the potential to be a really important part of that.
How Seth manages risk at Crystal Spring Farm. First, less tillage and more intercropping.
We're changing the way that we're growing. We're doing less tillage. We're trying to do more intercropping so we can transition from one crop to another, and instead of tilling that crop in, we're trying to undersow the next crop or the cover crop into it. And so it means that we're breaking less soil When soil is broken, it's a lot more susceptible to being blown away or washed away. It also kind of breaks up that tilth or the amending part of soil that really allows it to be resilient to weather. And so by keeping the soil undisturbed, it builds up its quality and means that both the soil itself is more resilient to the changes that are happening, but we've also found that the plants that are growing in it are more healthy, and healthier plants are more resistant to the stress that comes from higher temperatures and greater rainfall and all those kind of things. So it's a whole bunch of different things, but that's the primary thing that we're doing is we're trying to disturb our soil a little less.
Second, networking.
There is a lot of different people. It's definitely not just one resource. So yeah, we definitely, we're working on a research project with our local cooperative extension agent who we're very close with. We know people at the Department of Agriculture that we can reach out with, specific questions around regulation or funding. We work with nonprofits that are in the ag sphere like Maine Farmland Trust or CEI. It's a huge mix. I think for me, the thing is to really identify what the knowledge base and the specialty of each one of those sources of information are, so that you feel like the call that you make, that first call is hopefully going to be the last call. Quite often it's, it leads you to 2 or 3 other calls to actually get your answer, but, or you find out that you just have to find your answer yourself. So, but I think, really knowing what everybody's specialties are and the kind of the information that they hold within their little silo is really important. I have a close relationship with my local FSA agent, and so she's really good to talk to about current programming. She's good to talk to about what's coming down the pike as far as lending opportunities and that kind of thing. So if you know somebody who's doing a particular crop, is involved in a particular market, maybe bought a new piece of irrigation equipment, that's always your first call, because the assumption is that they've gone through some kind of research already, and maybe it's not exactly what you're doing, but they can at least get you down the right road and get you started.
Third, document crop losses and issues.
We're pretty diligent about times where we have some kind of a loss that isn't covered by crop insurance, documenting that, putting the right forms in, and that's really, that gets credited back to my FSA agent, who's like, this is really helpful to do. You don't know if there's going to be some help coming down the line in the future, but if you document it in this way, in this particular window, there can be something that could help you out later. Quite regularly, Congress or sometimes the state will react to losses. So, there's a drought relief package that just got approved in the state Senate, and then that references back to the drought loss that we had this last season. And so farmers that had drought loss can apply for a program, and they can get money towards development of an irrigation system. And so that's a direct reaction to what happened this last summer. We put in some paperwork and took some photos of some loss that we had in our blueberries that wasn't covered under our crop insurance with our FSA agent, and they put that on file. This last spring, Congress in DC approved disaster relief funding that's now working its way through various mechanisms, and I think this summer there's going to be a process where we'll be able to apply for some funding that's going to help us cover that loss that happened back in 2023. So the downside of a lot of the bureaucratic loss is that it's not a quick recovery. It's sometimes several years after that you can get some funding for that. But crop insurance generally is very different. You get the loss, you register for the loss, and then as soon as the regular harvest window ends, you can generally get a check right then in a very short period of time. So that's super helpful. But those federal programs or some of the state programs are a longer time window, and you've got to carry that loss on your books for a longer period of time. But there is some hope that you can get some funding back. And the NAP program is there for coverage of crops that don't have crop insurance coverage, and it's very much so, very much a minimal amount of coverage that's coming back to you, but it can be that difference between excuse me, staying in business or being able to kind of keep going with that crop year after you've sustained a loss. Our carrots and our Brussels sprouts are seasonal, and so it's not like we're taking up shelf space on a regular basis with those. They come and they go. Our wild blueberries, which we sell as frozen, are very much the other way around, and so we have used some of these crop insurance monies that come back in to buy product from other farmers so that we can keep our shelf space and keep our relationship with the retailers, which is super important. If you have a space in a freezer, which is a regular retail space that's there year round, you disappear, you lose that, they're going to fill that space with somebody else, and so then getting back into that can be a real challenge.
Fourth, create the habit of keeping good records.
It's pretty simple, and it's evolved a little bit over the last few years because of technology, but we have a series of clipboards that we keep in vehicles where we keep track of amendments that we're making, dates that we're seeding or planting things in the field, the amount of fertilizer we're using with those plantings, and then on the other side of it, the location, the day, and the amount that we're harvesting out of a particular crop. And then on the flip side of that, we keep track of, when you harvest something in bulk, that's not necessarily the same amount that's going to be retailed. And so we then keep track of the amount that's actually sold. You've got culls in there, you've got seconds in there, you're going to have some shrink that happened in the cooler. So the stuff that actually goes out the door. And so we can always do a comparison on that. And so I think the hardest part about records is just creating the habit. So that's where nowadays I also keep a running record in my phone. It's generally always in my pocket, and I've got a file open for any given year, and I just dump raw information into that. And so when the end of the year comes around, or if I need to access it, I look at those hard clipboards and I can compare them to what's in my phone, and we pick up anything that might have fallen in between the cracks that way.
So are you putting that into just a general spreadsheet, or do you have an app or a program?
I actually keep most of it, a little old school this way, I keep most of it on the paper record. And so if I need to make changes to the paper record from what's in my phone, I'll just add those to the paper record. But the paper record then goes into a file, and then when we need to access it, you pull it out of the file. You could easily do the same thing on your phone if you had a spreadsheet, or even just in the Notes app, and kind of track it that way. I definitely, because of the keyword search in your phone in any app, there's times when I'm like, and this isn't related to any kind of financial record keeping, but just from production, I'm like, oh, what day did we plant those oats, and what was the rate that we were going for? And so I can actually just put oats in, and it spits out every time I've written oats in that. And so I can go back through and find that particular number out. So in that way, it's really nice. It's made things a little easier. To start out with crop insurance, you have to have a few years of production under your belt. And so I think that's the first thing. And so starting out from your first year, really setting up those systems, as you said, where you're keeping records, and really kind of hold your feet to the fire of doing that. It keeps cascading year after year of importance, both the information for you and then information for the different agencies that are out there to help you. I guess the other thing that I would say, it's hard to understand your risk on a farm when you're new to that farm. And so I think, even having been farming, in total for more than a quarter of a century, you're still learning, and you still do things every year that you feel like you should have done differently or could have adjusted. And so that is going to continually be a part of the process. And so I think trying to make decisions that are as thoughtful as possible at the time you make them is really important, but also not trying to overthink things too much. Make it make sense on the ground, note how you did it, and then if you need to adjust the following year, that's completely reasonable. There's a lot of expertise out there, and so I would encourage new farmers, younger farmers to, one, to try and go to a lot of the educational things that are offered. Some of the twilight meetings on farms that Cooperative Extension offers, I'm an organic farmer, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association does the whole twilight season session. I think the vegetable growers of the state of Maine do a whole twilight session. And so, join some of those groups, get on some of those email lists. And even though it doesn't feel like you've got time in June or July, go and spend an afternoon, a few hours on somebody else's farm and see how they deal with problems. I always found like that was by far the most helpful thing, was to look at how another farmer addressed the problem. And it may not be your exact same situation, but you're going to glean some information out of it that's going to be helpful. The other part of it I would personally recommend is trying to reach out to the National Resource Conservation Service and get a conservation plan for your farm. NRCS has a huge range of helpful programs that can pay for, if not entirely, at least in part, some of these improvements in your farm that can really make you more resilient. They can help you pay for cover crops, they can help you pay for mulching, irrigation, water lines, roads, and it takes a while to get in the process. You've got to do your conservation plan, and then you've got to start with your first application, and because you're new, you're not going to be ranked very high, but over the course of several years, you get ranked higher and higher. Once you complete a contract with NRCS, it's kind of like the doors really open because they see you as somebody who can follow the contract and be through with it. And so that's another thing that I think would be really, really helpful, is that you have, all of us on our farm, we spend a lot of time thinking about the varieties and how we're going to plant. And then there's those projects that are big. They're the, boy, I'd really like to increase the insect diversity on my farm. Wow, it'd be really cool if that irrigation line that I put across the surface every year could be buried. And those things where you're like, wow, that would be really helpful. I don't have the time and I don't have the capital to do it during this year. Some of these helpful programs like through NRCS can help you look ahead and provide you with both the engineering expertise, they have engineers on staff, as well as some help financially with the process to move it forward. For a good chunk of our time, we were CSA growers, and if you do CSA correctly, cash flow isn't something that you really have to worry about. You've got the money coming in the lean times, and then the summers are just a lot of work, but you're not worrying about money so much. When you're wholesalers, our carrot and our Brussels sprout crop doesn't really start bringing us income until, August of any year. And then, depending on how much storage capacity we have, it's going to run out sometime in the late winter or early spring. And so there's a good chunk of the year when we don't have that cash flow coming in. So the frozen blueberries are really helpful for that.
University of Maine Cooperative Extension is an equal opportunity institution and provider committed to non-discrimination. For more information, visit extension.umaine.edu/non-discrimination.